Hi, welcome to Neuroverse
A podcast hosted by Carolina.
and Clara, where we discuss all matters from neuroscience to philosophy and beyond.
Today's episode is on oxygen and reactive oxygen species.
Something we've covered previously in our
Sleep
deprivation
deprivation.
episode. Yes.
In this episode, I want to challenge the fact that we need oxygen to respire.
I will be providing insights on why oxygen is necessary. No, this seems too obvious. Oxygen is necessary for life, but I'm going to go beyond and show that oxygen created life.
Okay, I am going to take inspiration from Francis Arnold by challenging the carbon organic bonds and pushing it further and creating carbon silicon and carbon boron bonds. I want to question why limit ourselves to oxygen. There's the whole periodic table. Could we find an element that performs the same function of oxygen and doesn't have the same problematic consequences that come with it, such as reactive oxygen species?
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. I would first just like to quickly say what reactive oxygen species are. I explained in my sleep deprivation episode, but I just wanted to reiterate. So reactive oxygen species is when an oxygen has an unpaired electron. So this is called a valence electron, and it reacts with a lot of things in your body. They're present in all of the neurodegenerative diseases and cancer, chromatid instability, a lot of bad things in the body, which goes towards my point of oxygen can be harmful
because
in
it's
excess.
so reactive.
Because it is so reactive.
Mm-hmm.
Although its reactivity, to be granted, is what drives respiration and ATP synthesis.
That's what makes it such a good metabolic driver.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The electrons get pumped across the electron transport chain, or they get carried across. Sorry, they don't get pumped. And then the protons from the oxygen get pumped across the mitochondrial membrane, and then this creates a gradient which drives ATP synthesis, which is how your body then uses this ATP to have energy to carry out several other metabolic pathways and functions and reactions, and then this oxygen binds to electrons to create water. And so this is essentially the main function of oxygen in our body in respiration.
Yeah.
And yeah, I want to pose the question, which may be a very silly question. I may be ignorant in the functions
I
and
think
limitations.
It's good that you're challenging the most obvious
of dogmas. No.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah, maybe there is another element that can be sufficiently reactive to drive the proton pump in ATP synthesis, which is what we need to respire and to be alive, but that doesn't react with everything in your body in excess and potentially cause death due to sleep deprivation. Spoiler alert.
I'm going to jump in here and speak a little bit about the history of oxygen.
Go on, tell us.
So, interestingly enough, 2.5 billion years ago,
yes,
bacteria were thriving on planet Earth without oxygen by what is known as... There was no neurodegenerative disorders.
No. You see, why did we evolve?
But yeah, they're thriving with anaerobic metabolism, which is metabolism without oxygen. And then the appearance of cyanobacteria, which are blue-green algae, which are actually photosynthetic, which means they convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen. They were existing in water, and so they were producing this oxygen as a waste product and essentially transferring the little oxygen that existed on Earth in the water into oxygen in the air. And over time, this increased the amount of oxygen in the planet atmosphere. And at first, minerals like iron would bind to this oxygen because it is quite reactive and take it up. So it didn't really have a big effect. But eventually, these minerals became saturated and the oxygen started accumulating in the air and combined with methane, which was the major greenhouse gas at the time, meaning it was the thing that was keeping the planet warm. And this created carbon dioxide. And so the levels of carbon dioxide started to increase in the air, and it is a greenhouse gas, but it's less effective than methane, so the Earth began to cool.
Okay.
And so begun the Ice Age.
Nice.
I'm having way too much fun telling this story.
I love it. It's like I'm there.
Okay, so the Ice Age began, and this was the first, possibly, of the mass extinctions. So mass extinctions is actually something that has happened multiple times on our planet. The 6th mass extinction is supposed to be coming. So this was one of the first, if not the first. So the Ice Age lasted around 300 million years, but the algae continued to thrive in these conditions nonetheless. And carbon dioxide continued to build up, so eventually this caused warming again, and it recovered the greenhouse effect. With this, the end of the period known as the Huronian glaciation occurred, and this coincides, interestingly, with the first evidence for eukaryotic life. So just to clarify, eukaryotic cells are cells that contain enclosed compartments, so their organelles have membranes, and this enables each organelle to have a specified function. And eukaryotic cells is what makes up humans, animals, plants, fungi, most things that exist today, whereas like prokaryotes are the other types of cells, and this is bacteria. And these are mainly bacteria. The interesting thing about this is that the emergence of oxygen, essentially, along with the Ice Age period, triggered the development of complex multicellular organisms, and the complexity of life essentially evolved because of oxygen. Linked to this is the evolution of metabolism across species, which we also kind of mentioned in the sleep deprivation episode. But a study carried out an analysis of structures, chemical properties, and chemical reactions in metabolites that were anaerobic and versus those that were aerobic. So those that didn't use oxygen and those that did. And they found that aerobic metabolism, which uses oxygen, was able to expand the structural and chemical diversity of metabolites, which again links back to what the purpose of evolution is, in a way, to diversify.
Yes.
Yeah. And they found that there were 130 new molecular scaffolds. So these are molecular structures that form the basis of many different molecules, such as steroid rings or something like this.
Yeah, just the foundation upon which further molecular structures get built upon.
The foundation for diversity as well. And there were 130 new molecular scaffolds in aerobic metabolites that weren't found in anaerobic metabolites. And most interestingly, the aerobic metabolites were better fit to modulate membrane functions. And higher organisms are, in fact, very dependent on membrane-enabled functions such as cell signaling, which occurs via receptors that are integrated in the membranes or channels. And so this metabolic evolution increased diversity of cellular organization and also increased the functional diversity. And what I found most interesting about this is, being a neuroscientist, a lot of neuroscience is based on the transmission of signals between neurons, which occurs via the connections called synapses, where neurotransmitters are passed from one neuron to the next. And, maybe this would have never evolved if it wasn't for oxygen.
Yes.
Have I won yet?
I think you might have. That is, such a good point. And that perhaps, even though the reactivity of oxygen can be very damaging, it can also lead to mutations, which then leads to variation. And this variation clearly has led to this complex life that allows for, like you said, all of these different neuronal signalings to occur and potentially consciousness. So
actually, it's interesting though, because perhaps along with this evolution of new functions, I guess another new function that evolved was like the ability to degenerate. So with increased functions such as perhaps synaptic transmission or just like cellular crosstalk and communication, also evolved these other negative functions like degeneration and all of the things that reactive oxygen species can do. It almost seems like these two positive and negative attributes cannot develop independently. They come together.
Yeah, it makes sense. You can't have one without the other. A lot of biological processes, it's amazing how the body manages to balance everything out, or biology in general, such as with reactive oxygen species. And in light of them existing, there also exists antioxidants and enzymes that neutralize the reactivity. Sleep,
in which
exactly.
Antioxidants help relieve the body of this metabolic stress of reactive oxygen species.
By binding with the valence electron and then therefore reducing its reactivity, I believe.
That reminds me of symbiosis.
Yes, well,
just because new functions evolve because of other functions.
Yes.
So, like, the ability to be reactive oxygen developed with the ability to prevent that. Am I
neutralizing it?
To neutralize it. Yeah, like the ability to neutralize reactions requires the reaction to occur in the first place.
Yeah, but it's interesting how nature always comes up with a balance or like a loophole or a way to let it not propagate exponentially.
Yeah.
I also just wanted to outline a couple other things about reactive oxygen species. It is harmful to DNA, and DNA double-strand breaks can be detected using antibodies, which recognize histone 2A phosphorylation, which is a modification triggered by DNA damage. As we've said in the sleep deprivation episode, this is seen in the gut, and this oxidation also triggers adaptive pathways such as lysosomes. So this oxidation, it causes the body's adaptive pathways to occur. So it can cause proteins which break down these damaged cells and damage DNA strands. And the body is very good at not only neutralizing these valence electrons, but then once a cell or a DNA thread has been damaged, making sure that those are broken down so it doesn't develop into further diseases, such as cancer and other neurodegenerative diseases. So, having listed all of these horrible things that reactive oxygen species do and are responsible for, another reason why I propose that maybe either a different element could functionally do similar things oxygen does, or simply not utilize oxygen at all to respire. And I think a paper in 2020 came out saying that Heneguya salminicola, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, is an 8mm white parasite which infects salmon, the fish, and
just to clarify.
Yes. And this parasite doesn't use oxygen to breathe. They aren't sure how it gets its energy. It is suspected that it gets it from the host, which you could then argue, okay, well, the host is dependent on oxygen, so ultimately the parasite is dependent on oxygen.
The main thing is they said that it's the first known multicellular animal that can survive without oxygen. So they mentioned that either it draws up oxygen from its host or it carries out anaerobic respiration without oxygen. But they didn't really confirm whether or not it actually requires oxygen. If it was a possibility to draw it up from the host.
I think it's a bit unknown. They don't know exactly how it carries out its metabolic processes.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to put that out there as a possibility, as well as...
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it was mentioned that usually organisms evolve to become more complex, more cells, more interactions, but this is an example of the opposite of an animal becoming less complex in a way. It shed its genes that control this mechanism, and it became using oxygen, and it became simpler. But this again feeds back to my point of, I now believe that oxygen is required for the complexity of organisms.
Yeah.
And perhaps another element could have done the same, but I do feel like the reactivity of the element was a big part of driving this.
That's true, but I would also want to point out that tardigrades, they survive pretty much everything, like in insane pressures. They can survive in space, and they can survive permafrost. And in permafrost, tardigrades do use oxygen in very small amounts.
Yes, they do.
But
well, I have a much easier debate, to be fair.
But maybe we don't eradicate oxygen. Maybe we don't replace it entirely. Well, maybe we could just decrease the amount we consume in order to limit the reactivity in the way that tardigrades do. You know, and they are an animal. They do have, cell membranes, and they have like organelles, so they do have like quite a high degree of complexity. So even though they do use oxygen, they use very small amounts, and I think maybe that contributes to their longevity, perhaps because it's not as reactive. But I'm speculating completely,
because I think the more metabolic load you have, the more metabolism that happens. In a way, everything is happening faster, right? And this can be linked to a shorter lifespan. In a way, it seems like it's almost like our lifespan is set by the amount of metabolism that occurs.
Even aging.
Yeah.
It's the amount of times that your cells die and regenerate.
Yeah. Well,
you have a limited number of like cell regenerations. You have a limited number of metabolic
reactions maybe to occur.
Yeah. So if we slowed it down, maybe.
But everything would be slower.
That's
maybe.
True. We'll work around. We'll find a way.
We're trying to find solutions here. We just, find an in-between between humans and tardigrades. Maybe we'll end up with an algae or something.
Yes, exactly. Listen, you may not be able to dream and perform higher cognitive functions, but
you will photosynthesize.
And you can live longer. Do you not want that perfect skin until you're 200?
That smooth membrane.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's becoming a bit sci-fi.
But I also wanted to ask, what element do you think could replace oxygen, if any element would have to?
Yes. I'm just quickly looking up the periodic table. Don't mind me.
Okay, so now that we've got the periodic table in front of us,
I feel like it can't be a noble gas because those are way too stable.
Yeah, you need something more fun, reactive.
Maybe between the 16th and 18th row. So maybe between something between oxygen and neon. Maybe fluorine.
Maybe neon, then the whole world would be lit up. Fluorine.
Yeah, maybe.
Similar to... But then don't you just think that reactive fluorine species would evolve?
Yes, but the question is whether or not they're more damaging than reactive oxygen species. Actually, no, it would be the same thing because it would be a valence electron. We need a chemist in here.
If any of you out there are chemists, let us know, please, which element can replace oxygen.
Yes. Or not a chemist. Just let your imagination run wild with the possibilities.
Yeah.
Why not choose hydrogen? Speaking of which, actually, I just wanted to make one last point.
Yes.
Which is whether or not oxygen consumption affects our perception of reality and therefore like our consciousness and the plane of reality that we experience. And looking at, for example, balloons.
Nitrous oxide.
Nitrous oxide, exactly. Nitrous oxide, it causes oxygen deprivation to the brain, which causes temporary feelings of euphoria, and it's also called laughing gas. So your experience of reality when consuming nitrous oxide is different from consuming oxygen. And
or also just if you go mountaineering, high
Exactly.
altitudes, if you're gonna any high altitudes, like your perception of reality changes.
yeah, exactly. And your sensorial experience changes. These may be small symptoms, but it just goes to show how our perception on reality, how our plane of consciousness is dependent on oxygen. And it would be interesting to know whether in a hypothetical different universe, if we didn't evolve using oxygen, if we evolved using,
we probably wouldn't have.
yeah, if potentially we evolved using a different mechanism, a different metabolic mechanism, or using a different element, or just being anaerobic in general, how different our perception of reality would be.
I think it would be wildly different, especially if it's neon.
Yes.
Wow. If you support my decision to replace oxygen,
please sign this petition. No, I'm kidding.
Sign the petition I just
No.
oh my gosh.
If we were to replace oxygen, it would have to be very deep down in the evolutionary tree. It wouldn't work now.
No,
But
it would kill us all.
It would.
And many other species.
Yes.
And probably cause maybe another ice age.
The one thing you look forward to, but the possibilities. Okay. Let's end this slightly sci-fi episode and let us know if you think we actually need oxygen or not, if oxygen is replaceable, if
whether or not the benefits of oxygen outweigh the risks of the reactivity and reactive oxygen species.
Yes.
We hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to check out our website with resources if you're interested in any of our episodes, and
as well as answering the question we pose on the Spotify platform.
yes.